All right, Andy, how are you? Thanks for joining me.
I'm doing all right. I had a seizure earlier today, but I'm doing okay. It just bumped my face. So
Yeah.
if it looks like I'm glistening, if it looks like I'm slowly turning into a glazed ham, that's what that's about. But
It,
I'm
it, it could pass for a sunburn.
yeah. Let's say that again. I look like I have tropical sunburn money.
There you go. And for the audio podcast listeners, it's nothing whatsoever. They don't see a thing.
No, 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 no. For the audio podcasters listening, I look like the sweaty elbow of a football player.
Nice. So first, congrats on everything, and we're of course going to be diving into it. But we'll start we'll start earlier. So I we both started comedy pretty much around the same time. Had a lot of fun memories, and especially since you and I would kind of travel together a lot because we both took the bus and we both lived in the same neighborhood and or similar neighborhoods. I think technically I was Fremont. I was considered Fremont, even though I was like right on the cusp and you were Wallingford at the time. But same thing. And you know, as I've gotten older, a lot of people say, those first couple years are the most fun. And I don't like to think in those terms, but I feel like those first couple years were kind of the most fancy free and just chill and just doing it for the fun of it. Would you agree with that? Like, what's your take on all that?
I think it's the time in which you're like when you're youngest in comedy, nobody has any of these huge aspirations. And even though it doesn't seem like it was a long time ago, it was like 2007. Even though that's not a long time ago, like the leaps and bounds comedy has made as we've moved into podcasts and everything, and like everybody's windows have opened in terms of opportunity. Like it seems so charming how simple it was back then. Uh and but at the same time, I think I would have stayed in it longer if there were more options. I think it was still like a finite amount of space acting as a meritocracy to a certain extent, when it really was like a you know it was still driven by as much opinion and backstage stuff as anything else I'd been involved to in the creative arts up till that point. But yeah, just going up and trying shit and not caring if it works, and coming back the next week and trying something new in that like open micer I'm not gonna repeat anything kind of way. uh yeah, I think it was fancy for you in that regard for sure. Have
Well, when
do you
you
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask. So, did you step away for a little while, or because I know you were still doing it when I left Seattle, and then I kind of wasn't able to keep tabs on everybody. So, did you step away from comedy for a while?
Yeah, I took a break of about I think 3.5 years because wasn't out as transgender, and I didn't think it was going to affect anything really big, but it was taking a lot of when people talk about coming out as queer or transgender, there's like especially as starting comedy before coming out, you act like it's really that your brain's taking up an amount of space, like you're not using your full capacity because you're part of your brain is keeping this thing locked in and away from your actual feelings. And so when you come out, you're immensely a nicer person and a better creative in general. Um, and I didn't stop writing. I like just went to writing on Twitter for years. And so I stayed writing, but I wasn't getting on stage during those years.
So, how when did you know? you were transgender? Like is it something you just always felt like you knew, or was there some time where you didn't know what it was, or talk about that process?
I've known since I was a kid. I mean, my parents kind of knew too. There's a picture of me at like, I don't know, 7 years old with a Fisher Price tea set for Christmas. And while that doesn't necessarily mean it's gendered, it was clear that I knew something about myself from an early age. And it wasn't until like high school, I'd say like 94, 95, that I was really starting to address it with friends and in small, closeted areas of my life. And as time went on, I uh I I knew it, and I had it in the background, and even my partner knew it, but I wasn't out about it. At that time I still used the word crossdresser, which is not correct a term.
Sure.
I thought like that's I don't try to explain that. That's like such an outdated term and feels weird to even say now, but yeah, that's just kind of like the push and pull about you're trying to say you're only fascinated by part of it or not fascinated, but that tug of war and all that space that's going on in your head is taking up so much of your time in your emotions that trying to like hold on to do something like comedy was really hard.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the term crossdresser, which, yeah, I can't remember the last time I even heard that term until right now. But like, I think that there are some people out there that they just like performing in drag, and that's it. And clearly, that's not the same thing or anywhere
No,
close.
I at a time, if you can imagine that, like I think it was that like crossdresser, transvestite, and transgender were all considered different things back then.
Hmm.
Uh, Mostly the crossdresser was like somebody who wanted to wear women's clothing, but not necessarily to the point of any reason other than they felt like it. Transvestite was somebody who's like attracted to the idea of wearing women's clothing, and then transgender was just somebody who's a a trans saw themselves as a woman, and it was just like if you can imagine, it's like a spectrum of living full time to living part time in terms of like what you do. But I don't, and I think it's obvious when you see pictures of cross dressers back then that it wasn't ever really a sexual thing per se, because you see somebody dressed up as like a librarian. You see somebody dressed up as like who looks like a just a 50-year-old English teacher with a not the like bombast of any sort of sexualized feelings. Yeah, and I just I it was a long term of digging out and slowly coming out to people over the years.
What year was it when you completely came out?
Like 2010, 2011, I think.
Okay.
And then like I think wide open maybe 2012.
So I remember, and I don't know if you remember this, but I asked you this because, I try to always learn and be a good ally. And there's a transgender person who we both know, and they were talking to me once many years ago, and they said to me that they were going to see their father. And I said, "Oh, okay, that's exciting." And then they said, "And he's going to meet me for the first time." And I said, "Oh, that," and I took that literally, and I said, "Oh, so you've never met your father?" And then they said, "No, I've met him many times, but he's never met me." And I said, "Oh, okay." And so when I saw you for the first time when you were out, I said, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" And it might be a really stupid question. And if it is, I feel like we've been friends long enough. And so I asked you, I said, "Are we meeting for the first time?" And you looked at me and you said, "No." You were like, "Why did you ask me that question?" And I explained why. You said, "Yeah, that's not. I mean, I guess that's a thing for some people, but that's not how I see it." Is that sort of how it goes?
I think that when somebody finds it later in it's a life, it's a possibility that that is how they feel and express their emotions. I that's just like in the same way that some people, especially transgender people, put up like a before and an after pic of them before they transitioned on hormones to after. And I don't believe I personally just knew I was always this person, you know?
Hmm.
Ever since I was a kid, I don't see it as a before and after, but more of a journey. But
Mm.
if somebody's drastically been living at distance with from their like parent and aren't out to them and are start suddenly going by a new name and are suddenly going home to like splash it across the page to some conservative family member, I can totally see that as meeting you for the first time, but I think
Mm.
that's more of like a something you'd hear in a movie.
Okay.
Uh but you know, different people describe it or find themselves in different places about how they come out. So it's entirely just related to how that person feels, but I've known for so long that even meeting trans comics now, they deal with different things than I dealt with when I was growing up. So like they have
How
the
so?
internet, they have like you can order breast forms online. Like you can like find like all of these things to try out gender in a certain way, but I knew in like 95 and I didn't really have a community to find and I had to craft my own boobs. Like cuz you like as a trans woman, an older trans woman, you have boobs of different sizes. Like you start where everybody starts with like a balloon. Um and then it's like but the ones that I had to craft were out of like plastic grocery bags filled with bird seed with like a knot at the top. Like I had to craft mine.
Okay.
uh, but like thankfully no the trans people that are coming up now don't have to deal with like the same struggles and it's very nice and they don't have wouldn't have to like have that same narrative anymore. People can meet be who they are supposed to be from the beginning at a very young age and that's like very fortunate and makes me very happy. But it is definitely a different set of it. I sometimes can't. I sometimes struggle to see uh like what we have in common with our struggles in the same way. But uh I'm happy for trans youth to be able to come out way earlier now.
That yeah, well, that's interesting because I'm curious. Then, do you feel that as a society we're going in the right direction? Because I mean, everything you just said is awesome, but then you also look at some of the laws that are passing in places like Florida, and I think it's frightening what's going on. So kind of what's your take on all that?
I think that we have more media outlets than we ever had before. I think that we have you know, we'll read a lot of news that doesn't represent these small areas, but the lawmakers will respond to what they think a larger narrative in their party is, and then enact these laws that are fucking awful and built on lies of like these like you know places trying to get clicks or sharing all this misinformation. And I think that that can be an issue, but when I'm out touring the country, I don't see the same kind of hatred that that these laws and these like leaders and these like rallies or groups or whatever are trying to like instill fear. So it doesn't I don't think it largely represents like the communities they say they're representing. Um I I I mean, I never thought we'd have gay marriage, but we've been slowly moving towards that, and I think we're just in you know slowly coming up. It's just that especially I think that it's intrinsically linked to us dealing with the idea of how we uh, address the patriarchy, and that's like baked into all of the issues about trans stuff. But I do think we're heading towards better places. I I've joked recently that we're better off when we're safer when you don't know we exist, though.